Hey there, I'm a DIY track guy. This is my humble garage, and today we piece some bits onto a motor. Last time we took this junkyard poop and turned it into a polished turd. Next, let's put this thing back together and bolt on the required EcotecMiata stuff. This motor deserves some new spark plugs, so I got some NGK Iridium IXs, and the part numbers are there. Next up is to install new exhaust manifold studs, and these ones conveniently have Loctite on the threads and a Torx E7 head. We don't need to go too crazy tightening these, I just bottomed it out and snugged it up. This is the original crank pulley bolt that I put back here after we installed the new front seal. This is a torque to yield bolt and it can only be used once. That's why I got a replacement. Using this galvanized strapping, which I've tripled up, I'm gonna bolt this to the crank pulley here, and if it'll reach, the other side here. Now with this thing in place, let's try to tighten up this bolt. Next, we need to rotate this 125 degrees. I don't have the proper tool, but what I will do is make a mark on the bolt itself, and come over here to 125 degrees, and make a mark there. And there we have it. Everything we've done up to this point has been about refinishing and revitalizing this made in Mexico General Motors motor. But now we're going to turn our attention to the actual EcotecMiata instruction manual, and it says to remove a number of components from the donor motor, including this oil pressure sender. Next, we can take this Autometer metric adapter 2278, which is for electric oil pressure gauges. Now over here, you'll recall we took this off of the 1.6 Miata motor. This was underneath the intake manifold. Here's the freshly painted coolant pipe, and we want to inspect these O-rings. These are the original ones that came on the vehicle, and the instructions say to change them out if they look suspect. I purchased 2 of these O-rings in advance in case these were bad, and I think it's just good practice to replace this kind of stuff while the cooling system's apart. And here's the thermostat outlet spacer that's included in the kit, and that goes right here. And the instructions say to apply RTV on both sides of this spacer. This is Permatex Ultra Gray gasket maker, and some folks say to use the black variety, but EcotecMiata says that this is just fine. So if you've been following along very keenly, you'll notice that this only has one outlet port. This is the one that came with the motor, and it has that water outlet, but an additional one over here that people either cap or loop. But we got the one with the single outlet, and this one's junk. Next up's this second spacer, and it goes on like this. Now that the RTV is applied to this side, let's go and put it on the block. That smells lovely. Reminds me of fruit bubble gum. If I'm honest, this starter looks pretty terrible, but it does work. We tested it with the compression test on the engine stand earlier. So the plan is to run it and in typical mostly useless fashion, regret it later. Next we need to remove this coolant bleed fitting from the upper coolant outlet port. Now that we have the bleed port out, the instructions say to tap this with a 1/8 inch BSP tap, like this one, which I had to buy so I could use once. And to catch any of the metal shavings that may fall through, I'm just gonna wad up a piece of green tape and stick it in there. I was a little bit confused about which drill bit size to use that's appropriate for this 1/8 inch tap. After Googling it, I believe it should be a 21/64 bit, but I'm gonna go one smaller with a 5/16 just to be safe. And yes, I did test this out on another piece of scrap metal just to make sure it works. And if we test fit the tap, you'll see that it's just a little bit too tight. Let's step up to the next drill bit. And there we go, that's a good fit for the tap. And here's the water temperature sender that goes to the dash gauge that we removed from the back of the Miata block. And it threads right in here. Next up, we're going to install the bracket that holds the power steering pump, the alternator, and install the drive belt. Just like the starter, I got this alternator with the motor for a small additional fee. It doesn't look very good and I don't know how long it's gonna last, but if it does fail, it's pretty easy to replace this one with a new one. Let's go ahead and install the drive belt. This is a Bando 5PK355. This belt's really loose. I'm not sure if I did something wrong here, but let's proceed to the next step. We can always replace the belt or fix whatever I did later. Similar to another YouTuber, Carter Manecki, who did this swap, I'm having a problem with my engine stand because two of the mounting points are bolted directly into the oil pan. So to get this off, I'm going to need to support the engine with the engine hoist or cherry picker so that I can remove these two bolts. And here we got it set up. I give this a jankiness level of a 7 out of 10, with a 10 out of 10 being this. Now it's time to remove all the oil pan bolts. I'm not an expert at what I'm looking at here, but just observing the carbon buildup in certain areas. I feel like this should be expected from a motor of this age, but let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. Now that the old gasket is removed, we need to thoroughly clean the gasketing surface to remove any oils so that we can install the new EcotecMiata oil pan. Now is a good time to talk about this swap kit. The core of the kit wasn't purchased directly from EcotecMiata, at least not by me. I purchased this from my friend Mark, who runs a racing team that has two EcotecMiatas that compete in the Champ Car Endurance Series. I mentioned them before in a previous video. Now if you're familiar with the EcotecMiata swap kit, you'll notice that this oil pan doesn't look exactly like the one that they sell on their website. This one's been reinforced with steel welded to the pan in key areas. Like this here, where it hangs low under the car and can take damage. And around the sides and up top, Mark's also added this reinforcement to beef up this oil pan and make it endurance race ready. The internals remain the same as designed by EcotecMiata, with the oil pickup in the middle and the trap doors on the sides to help prevent oil starvation in high G turns. All this additional reinforcement does come with a weight penalty though, and this weighs almost 30 pounds. I'm not sure how much the original one weighs, but I hope that those fasteners are up to the task of holding this big girl onto that block. Before we install the oil pan, let's take a quick interlude back to our drive belt situation. This is the one that we tried to install, the Bando 5PK1355, and we found that it was too long. Unfortunately, they don't make a 5-rib belt that's much shorter than this, so I had to go with this. This Continental belt is a 1325, which makes it 30 millimeters shorter than the last one, and lengthwise this should fit. Unfortunately, this one is a 6PK, which means it has 6 ribs, and what we need is 5. And here it is installed, and notice that we have good tension on the belt. But before we leave here, there's 2 things worth noting. Firstly, I understand that some folks online have concern about the amount of contact that the belt has on the alternator pulley here. However, people who run this kit and the power steering have reported that this is more than enough contact to run the alternator just fine. Secondly, as we've been discussing and working on here, the LE5 crank pulley requires a 5-rib belt. However, this power steering unit is from a Buick Regal, and that uses a 6-rib belt. But again, people who run this setup haven't reported any issues, and in fact, just by looking at it, notice how the drive belt has contact around half of this pulley. So that looks pretty good to me, and I don't have any concerns with it. Now that we're ready to install the oil pan, we're going to be using this Permatex Ultra Gray. I already used this on the cooling system, but let's just mention that this is good for high torque and vibration resistance and continuous usage at temperatures up to 232 Celsius or 450 Fahrenheit. There's 3 lengths of bolts that are supplied with the EcotecMiata kit. Now, as I said, this one doesn't come directly from EcotecMiata, so their fasteners may look slightly different, but the lengths are the same. Around the sides of the oil pan, we use the shortest length of bolt, and the instructions say not to use a washer or Loctite. But my endurance racing buddy Mark advises putting lock washers and washers on all the fasteners, so that's what we're gonna do. For the forward 4 bolts here, we're gonna use the long bolts, of course, and red Loctite. And these 2 go into the rearmost holes with Loctite. Now we tighten down each of these bolts to 18 foot-pounds according to the sequence diagram in the instruction manual. Next, let's install the dipstick into the oil pan, and to do that we need this brass adapter fitting, and on this side we apply some thread sealant. Now we can install this nice bracket that holds the top of the dipstick. And here we are with the EcotecMiata engine mounts, and you may notice that they're very orange. They didn't come like that. I painted them with some scrap brake caliper paint, and this is how they turned out. The left side engine mount bolts into these 4 points here, and the kit comes with 14mm spacers that go here and here. Because I bought the kit from my racer friend Mark, he gave me this stack of washers that's roughly 14mm. Here we are on the right side of the motor, and we want to bolt up the engine mount to these 3 points here. If you have the EcotecMiata engine mount kit, the top bolt will come with a 13mm spacer, but again, we've got a stack of washers. And here's our plastic Ecotec intake manifold. The throttle body goes here. And of course, on the back side, we have the 4 intake ports, but also notice this. This is a vacuum port, and of course it lines up with a hole on the block. Now going back to my racer friend Mark, he recommends blocking that little port down there to prevent the intake from drawing too much vacuum. So with the help of Snap, Crackle, and Pop, we're gonna mix up some epoxy. All right, and there we go. We just need to let that cure. If you've been following the build, you'll recall when I got this motor, I did a compression test on the engine stand, and the readings for cylinder 2 and 3 weren't very impressive. In fact, they were really unimpressive. I mentioned my problem to my friend Matt, and he suggested that I use this. Kleen-Flo A22 combustion chamber cleaner, and he recommended that I give a good spray down each of the cylinder holes and leave it there for a few days. The intention is to allow this stuff to break down the carbon deposits that are gumming up the piston rings and potentially causing my low compression. He also mentioned using an engine flush and a quick succession of oil changes, but we'll get to that later. Big thanks to Matt for giving this to me, and let's go ahead and get it in the cylinders. So that wraps up this video, but there's still more to do to this motor before it can go into the car. Stay tuned for the next one. Hey, if you like what you're seeing, please subscribe, like, notification bell, leave a comment. Nobody pays me for this. It's all for my own enjoyment, and your positive feedback motivates me to make more videos like this one. You're awesome. I'm useless. Thanks for watching.